Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Finally Quit Porn podcast. Welcome back, Mary. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. How about you?
Yeah, not too bad, thanks. And we'll just do a quick one today. I know the sun is shining there in Portland, so let's get you out in
Yeah.
the sun. Now, I have been researching pretty much all day. I've been researching neuroscience, the molecule of more. I just love this book. I've probably read it 2 times already, but now I'm taking even more notes than ever. And the author of this book has said that he'd be up for coming on the podcast at some point in the future as well. So I've got an extra incentive to read. And I just want to share a few things that I've learned recently and then run it
Yeah.
by you as well and see what you think. So the first thing that I found just so interesting was about reward prediction error. It's essentially this idea that the actual reality of an event minus the expected reality equals the reward prediction error. The reward prediction error is going to correlate with the amount of dopamine activity being released. So let's put this in the context of porn, because that's probably making no sense to anyone on the first hearing. And that's because I've not explained it well at all yet. But maybe if you are following along, then great. So I'll just put in the context of me, porn, TikTok, Instagram, all of that stuff. So basically, in the past, I tricked myself. The junky thinking in my mind was okay. I'm going on Instagram. It's not a problem. It's not a porn site. I'd go on the explore page. And at first, on that explore page, everything's fine. You know, you're probably going to see a few friends. You're going to see some nature. You're going to see some funny clips. Going to see some football. It's all good. Okay. So at first, the expected reality is probably at like quite a low level. I'm not expecting to see anything that crazy. The actual reality is very, very low. There's no real reward prediction error. There's not really much dopamine being released at that point. But then I scrolled down and I'm starting to increase that expected reality a little bit. And then suddenly I see an attractive girl, a really attractive girl. She's maybe in a bikini or something. And the actual reality just massively surpasses the expected reality because suddenly unexpectedly, there's this hot girl on my Instagram, and I'm not expecting to see that. So now there's a massive reward prediction error. And dopamine is all about the anticipation of pleasure. It's not about the pleasure itself. So it's all about that sort of excitement of what could come in the future. That's how the brain's evolved. So I see this attractive girl, and then what I'm going to do is I click into her, I go out of that view, I refresh the screen. Okay, now there's a few more girls popping up. And then I'm just getting into this kind of rabbit hole of refreshing the thing more and more. The dopamine is just going up more and more because what's going on is the actual reality is increasing more and more. And so the expected reality and the actual reality, there's a greater difference between those two realities. And so this reward prediction error is just getting bigger and bigger. The dopamine activity is increasing more and more. Essentially, what's going on is at first, I'm not really expecting to see too much. There's a bit of anticipation there, but I'm not expecting to see too much. But as I play around with the algorithm in Instagram, I'm now seeing more and more sexual stuff. Gets to a point where I'm now suddenly seeing this stuff that's incredibly novel, incredibly surprising, and I'm seeing different things every moment. The dopamine is going absolutely crazy. Reward prediction error is massive because I'm just not expecting it at all, and it's so, so exciting. You know, go down and masturbate, orgasm, all of that. What then happens at the orgasm, which is super interesting as well, is that you go from the dopamine, like sort of headspace, into here and now chemicals. So other chemicals are released, which is why you have post-nut clarity. So suddenly you can see clearly again, and you're like, whoa, as if I just done that. Like, oh my God, that was not a good idea. And that's because there's literally like a shift in the molecules that are being used in the brain. Now, I've talked quite a bit there, but that's basically my experience of looking at sexual content, what I believe is going on in the brain for me, the neuroscience of it. I'm guessing you're going to come in here and say, okay, well, all of that stuff's interesting, but what's the practical help? How do we overcome this problem, right? I know that's what you're thinking. So, Mary, you want to chime in at this point? What are you thinking about all of that? I'm just really intrigued.
Uh, you know me too well at this point. Oh my God. So what you're saying is that the anticipation of it is you're kind of already in it, right?
Yeah.
Well, the good news is that all kinds of things can make you want to engage in compulsive behavior, right? But that we deal with the wanting. And so, so you refresh and the algorithms are all like now like really really like working you, right? So, I mean, it still is just making you want to do it. Are you saying that then the release of the actual masturbating to porn is not as much satisfaction or dopamine release as the anticipation of it? Is that what you're saying?
So yeah, what's going on in the brain is you get more and more excitement in the build up. So that's why people end up doing like edging and binging and things like that, because that's when the dopamine is really, really active. So like the dopamine activity is really great in the build up to the actual climax. When the climax takes place, the brain shifts completely and you're suddenly in here and now chemicals, which are different. So
Yeah.
I don't actually know what the exact chemicals are at this point. Maybe it's like oxytocin, although I think that's more related to sex. But it's a different part of the brain essentially, because what you have is the peripersonal space and the extrapersonal space. In the peripersonal space, that's things like that you can actually like have right now. So these are things that you have literally here. For example, I'm holding a mic right now in my hand. This is in the peripersonal space because it's taking place right now. What's going on in the extrapersonal space is anything in the future. So in that moment that I'm like masturbating and looking at these photos or videos or whatever on TikTok or Instagram, it's like the anticipation is for something that's going to happen in the future. And all of that in my brain is going on in a different, almost like dimension. It's in the extrapersonal space. And then suddenly, when you have that orgasm, you're back in the here and now chemicals and you're back in the peripersonal space. So it's like a different region of the brain. So essentially, that excitement fades and that activity and that dopamine sort of fades away. So you've ended up looking at something horrible or you don't actually really like what you've looked at. And then it's
Yeah.
like reality hits again. But yeah, the junky thinking that's going on, because I know we talk about that a lot, is obviously like, well, it's the algorithm. That's one junky thought that'd be going on in that moment. Another junky thought is I'll stop soon.
Yeah.
Not going to continue. Another junky thought is, you know, I'll only look once or it's not going to go on for that long. But a really interesting thing about desire and supernormal stimulus, which porn is that that desire is never satiated. You're just going to desire more and more and more. So the moment you first look on
Yeah.
Instagram and you're like, okay, I'm just going to look once, it'll be fine. That's a lie. That's junky thinking 101, I would say, is like once is okay. It's not okay. It actually creates more of the desire. That's how the neuroscience of this works. But yeah, back to you, Mary. Does that make a bit more sense?
Well, I feel it just reminds me of like, let's say we have a cocaine addict who has decided they are going to stop using, right? They are not using cocaine anymore, ever again, right? So then they're having all this junky thinking, all this desire. They want to use the cocaine. And then let's say they're at work and they just can't stop thinking about it. And so then they text their dealer and they decide I'm gonna go, it's Friday night, I'm gonna stop, I'm at my dealer, I'm gonna get this gram of coke, and then I'm gonna do it when I get home. They're gonna have a lot of relief from that desire when they do that. And then all that anticipation, but then they get home, they do the coke, guess what? Now they're like, fuck. And I have remember letters from cocaine addicts that would blow your mind, is
Mm,
like the actual hell that they live in, the
okay.
despair. So yeah, but it's that build up to it. And the thing is I think that while all of that might be interesting neuroscience, how is it really helpful to know that?
Mm,
How's it going to help someone who's an addict? Because I mean, I don't understand why it would be helpful. I mean, understanding neuroscience is one thing. And I think where it's useful to us and to the work we're doing, that is the neuroplasticity aspect of it, which is that these neural pathways can change, but it doesn't really matter when the desire is, what part of the brain it's in, or when it's the most, or when it's the least, or if it's going to feel less satisfying here, or it takes the desire away just because I'm thinking I'm going to engage. What's the most important thing is that clarity of knowing what being stuck in your addiction is costing you, and knowing that whenever it appears in whatever neuroscientific part of your brain, that you can identify that this is happening, and you can use your script to be able to turn it around to connect. And see, that's another thing with the neuroplasticity, is that most of the addiction treatments are teaching people to avoid, distract, substitute, try not to think about on some level, or just experience the feelings in their bodies or whatever. But there's, as far as I know, we're the only ones that are actually giving them the ability, giving them the tool to connect to that pathway, so that neuroplasticity, disconnection, reconnection can actually happen. And with the script also teaching them how to avoid the feelings of deprivation, because the feelings of deprivation, if they don't know how to identify and correct that thinking, then it's still going to connect to the old pathway. And so, yeah, neuroplasticity is really, really good news. You can change your thinking, you can change this desire track, but there's getting into the desire track, staying in it long enough, making your choice to not have to engage in pornography or whatever addiction you have, to not have to engage in that. And then those pathways do disconnect, right?
Yeah.
And new ones form, but they form from that moment of compulsive desire, that pathway of compulsive desire. They're forming from that. They're not just putting it on hold while I go over here and learn some really, interesting distraction technique, where it made a pathway, right? It's connecting to the one that you need to connect to long enough to have it change, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I definitely think that learning the neuroscience is like interesting to me, but at the end of the day, you do need a practical method. What I also found really interesting though is how this book does differentiate between the wanting and actually having something. So evolutionary, your brain has got one pathway, like one part of the brain is going to care about wanting something, desire, yeah, the anticipation, the seeking, the pursuit, and all of that is very dopaminergic. Then on the other hand, you have the having of something. So I don't know, maybe you own something already, you've got like a nice relationship going on, you've got a job or something. So if you have like the context of porn, it's like, okay, so yeah, you're wanting porn, and that desire, that compulsive desire, may be quite intense at times. But once you actually have the porn, the wanting and the liking are two totally separate things. So having it and liking it, that's totally separate from actually wanting it. And this reminds me of the get, give up, and glamorize part of your program, because people, what they do is, because they want the porn, because they've got an addiction, their neural pathways have changed, they're wanting it a lot. But then when they actually have it, they're not enjoying it. Just like the cocaine addicts that you just talked about there. And I think when you actually have like a remember letter and you go to that and you can think through correctly, like, okay, these are my options when you have an urge, which is what we do. It's so powerful, because then you can kind of get out of that wanting as well. And also,
Yeah.
you're gonna want it, but you can have it. Like, that's the deprivation thinking piece,
Yeah.
isn't it? It's like that's another reason why people engage in compulsive behaviors and get addicted to things, is because they feel like they can't have the thing that they want so much. What we're saying is, okay, let's acknowledge that wanting. Yeah, you are going to want it because your brain's wired in a certain way at this point.
Yeah.
But one, you can actually have it if you want. Two, if you do actually have it, here's all the consequences. Let's actually
Yeah.
think through, make a choice in those moments.
Well, and also that anticipation phase of it, that's all part of it. If you're allowing your brain to go unchecked, just thinking, oh, I'm gonna do it, I'm gonna text my dealer, if you let that go unchecked, that's all part of it. You got to treat that as well, regardless of what phase of the dopamine cycle it is, because you can identify the thinking, and it's all about the thinking. And what I would caution people to, you know, avoid as well is not to allow the mind to think, oh, this is just what my brain does. This
Mm.
is out of my control because my brain wants me to go and get this dopamine release, because we are living in a society filled with helplessness, validated, learned helplessness, that it's just what happens to me. This is just my disorder I have. There's a million disorders that involve the brain and the neural pathways. It's just what happens to me. It's out of my control. So I would caution people learning neuroscience stuff to be like, well, yeah, that might be what's happening, and we can look at that and see and understand, but it's not something. Any millions of things can make you want to engage in your compulsive behavior. That's, you know, it's just, that's a fact. But that doesn't mean that you're going to do that, you know, out of control. You still can have a choice about how you're going to act when you have that desire, you know.
Depends what you want though, doesn't it? Because at the end of the day, you can either choose to learn some neuroscience and use your own confirmation biases and the addicted part of the mind to go, okay, well, that's why I'm addicted, and then blame it all on some neuroscience. Or you can learn neuroscience and actually go, okay, well, I understand neuroplasticity now. I understand that there's nothing wrong with who I am, and I can let go of this shame, and I
Yeah,
can change my brain because that's how neuroscience works. You know, like for me
yeah,
personally, the way I see it, it's very, very empowering because you can
yeah,
realize that, yeah, it's nothing to do with who I inherently, intrinsically am. It's just
yeah,
the reward circuitry works in a certain way due to evolution, and I can change these pathways in my brain, and there are
yes.
tools out there to do that. And then you go and do that. So, you know, it's
That
something to get excited
understanding,
about.
yeah, and then the exciting part for me is that that there's a neuroplasticity, that it can change no matter how it got wired, how deeply ingrained that wiring is, which is really deeply ingrained for most addictions, you know, very specifically pornography, with the nofap streaks intermittently reinforcing the behavior, with food compulsion, diets reinforcing the behavior. So it's really, you know, it's really important, or good news, that even though those can be so deeply ingrained through the mistreatment of them, of the addictions, that they can still change.
Yeah.
You know, that pathway can still change to a point that permanent mental freedom is possible.
Yeah, I think a big takeaway, like which we can kind of end this podcast on because we don't want to go on too long, but I think you made a really, really good point about the pathway of anticipation also being like many steps ahead of you actually going and doing whatever compulsive behavior you have. So like for me in the past, that sort of pathway of desire and the dopamine being activated is probably gonna take place that moment I think, okay, should I download Instagram? Should I go on Instagram to do XYZ with some junky thinking bullshit that's convincing me that I'm only downloading Instagram to
Yeah.
go and do some work or something? You know, that's what would come up for me in the past before this method is I'm just downloading it for work. And then all this dopamine is being activated because it's this anticipation, this excitement of, oh, potentially I'm going to end up, you know, looking at something, who knows, right? And if I look back, if I had just addressed like, okay, I've got the compulsive desire right now, I'm going to go to my scripts, I'm going to read through the consequences of this, make that choice as early on as possible, you're going to avoid getting into the spin and getting out of control and then refreshing multiple times and bullshitting yourself into looking at porn, thinking, oh, it doesn't really count because it's just the algorithm, you know, there's no consequences if I don't actually fully engage. It's like all that junky thinking that does go on when you're in addiction, which I experienced. So when you can get out of that and actually just identify, yeah, I'm wanting to engage my compulsive behavior right now. You go to a script, you make your choice, job done, move on, feel empowered, and live a really nice, free life. Like it can be that simple, but you got to identify it early on, as you say.
Yeah, and the other thing, I can just see the addicted minds going to, but dopamine's a good thing. I mean, people are taking pills to help them release dopamine. I mean, there's a bajillion-dollar industry right there, right? Dopamine's a good thing. Yeah, dopamine's a good thing. But when you're in an addiction, it's that tolerance cycle, right? Where you build a tolerance, you need more and you need more and you need more and you need more. And once you get out of that, then, or get free of the addiction, then yeah, dopamine's good. It's like, and you can get it in reasonable ways from reasonable sources that aren't destroying your life,
Yeah, I mean,
You can be like, oh, yeah,
dopamine's all well and good until some greedy capitalist people who just want to
yeah,
make some quick
yeah,
money come along and
yeah,
introduce super normal stimulus into the market to destroy young people's brains. Like, no,
yeah,
dopamine is not good in the context of porn because pornography bypasses satiety circuits. And so essentially, you can continue looking and looking and looking and get into the tolerance cycle and never get free of this problem because there
yeah,
is no satiety circuit going, no, stop now. Like our brain evolved to
yeah,
have certain restrictions in place so that people can't do certain things endlessly. If you eat too much food, and I know there's a lot of food compulsion as well, but if you eat too much food, you will get to a point where you will be sick. And there's a lot of circuits in place like that. However, some foods probably bypass that satiety circuit now as well, so we'll ultra process. And it's the same concept with pornography. Is you could actually watch pornography for like 6 or 7 hours a day. Like that is possible. Masturbating, edging, all of that stuff, maybe not actually orgasming every time. You could go and do that if you chose to, but you wouldn't be able to have sex for 6 or 7 hours and like do that, because porn bypasses the reward, like the satiety circuit, which is meant to be there to help people stop. It's so messed up, and I really dislike that this industry exists, but there is hope for people, and they can get around this problem, which is what I really,
yeah.
really hope people
And
can do.
addiction desire is insatiable. It's insatiable. It makes you want more and more and more and more and more. And that's not any kind of normal dopamine. I mean, like we said at the beginning here, sun is shining in Portland, and I want to go outside and look. I have a beautiful tree that is full of bees, get a little sunshine, get a little reasonable dopamine. But what you said about the people, compulsive eaters eating until they get sick. I remember I was teaching a group of women, and they are men and women, and they all started talking about the second wind, where they could eat like to the point that they get ridiculously full, kind of like second wind people that are runners, where there's like binging to totally full, and then they get like, if they continue to eat past that point, they get what is a second wind, and then they could eat just a whole lot more. So insatiable desire, it's not, I mean, if people are thinking of dopamine as a positive thing, yeah, it's a positive thing. We want that. We want happy feelings, or whatever dopamine releases in our brains. We want that feeling, but addiction is not a happy dopamine place.
Yeah,
Addiction.
well, you want to use the reward circuitry and dopamine to get what you actually want in life and the things that you actually want to have. Whereas I doubt anyone listening to this podcast is like, what I actually want in life. Like when I really sit down and I journal, have a cup of tea, what I really want in life is to have porn. Like
Yeah.
no one's thinking that. Like they're not. It's just like the reward circuitry
Yeah.
is wired to want porn. And that's a
I really want to be stuck in an addiction that causes me hell. Yeah.
Literally, no one wants that.
Yeah.
So yeah, and also going out and sitting in the sun and stuff. To be honest with you, I think that actually uses like a different part of the brain. It's like here and now chemicals. It's probably like oxytocin, serotonin, and things like that. And the
Sounds
dopamine
good.
is the molecule of more because that's when is when you want more and more and more. It can never ever be satisfied because it takes place in a different part of the brain. It's the extra personal space. It's like essentially things that you want in the future, and there's this like difference between what's going on now and the future. And in that gap is where the dopamine is being released. I don't know if that really makes sense, but essentially you
Yeah.
can't ever feel satisfied by dopamine because dopamine is the molecule of more and it only exists in the future. It doesn't exist in
Okay.
the here and now. It's a different part of the brain that exists in the here and now. So
That makes sense. So it's oxytocin and serotonin and other things that you get from reasonable sort
yeah,
of engagement and things that make you feel good
yeah,
versus
exactly.
dopamine. Okay, well, I should probably read the book.
Yeah, it's a great book. It's a good
Yeah,
book. So
yeah.
anyway, we'll wrap that up there. Thanks so much again, Mary, for joining me. And hopefully we can continue with these podcasts, get some more practical help out there to people. If you
Yeah.
do want more help, if you want to learn the Beyond Compulsion method, learn how this all works, then get in touch with me. I will put a link in the description to this podcast somewhere, and we can jump on a one-on-one call if you want to have the fundamentals. So yeah, thanks for listening. And leave a 5-star review because we've not had any in a few weeks. And we used to have a lot of reviews coming in, and then I didn't mention the reviews for like 2 months or something, and no one's left a review in a few months. Or maybe the podcast just aren't that good, but I would
Yeah.
love to hear a 5-star review.
Sucks.
Right.
Everybody
Yeah.
hates it.
Everyone hates the podcast. Or leave a 1-star review if you want to just like upset me deeply.
Yeah.
Um, I'm I'm not even joking. No. All right, thanks a lot for listening, though. Seriously. Yeah, take it easy, and I hope you have an amazing rest of your day. Goodbye.
Okay, see ya.